"I'd take you out if you were my age," I told my neighbor. She smiled. "Age is just a number, Joshua." "Hello, I'm Josh, I'm 24, freelance coder. The guy who orders takeout at 2 a.m. and avoids hallway conversations. I've been living in this building 6 months, keeping to myself, focused on work and late-night gaming sessions. Not the type to knock on neighbors' doors. Not the guy who gets involved. But I notice things. I notice her, Diana, across the hallways, impeccably dressed, even for a grocery run. We'd exchanged maybe 20 words total until that Thursday evening when her keycard failed and I found myself in her apartment. Drinking wine, making her laugh. Then came the power outage. 3 days of darkness that changed everything. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. I'd been living in apartment for B for just over 6 months now, and I'd gotten pretty good at disappearing into my own little world. The building itself was nice enough, one of those converted industrial spaces with exposed brick and too many right angles. But mostly, it was just a place where I could exist undisturbed. Coding away on freelance projects while the rest of the world spun on without me, my daily routine had settled into something predictably comfortable. Wake up whenever my body decided it was done sleeping, stumble to my desk with coffee, and dive into lines of code until my eyes went blurry. Sometimes I'd order takeout, usually Thai from the place 2 blocks over that didn't judge me for requesting extra spicy pad Thai 3 times a week. Other nights, I'd lose track of time racing through virtual worlds. Until dawn started creeping through my blinds. It wasn't exactly the glamorous city life I'd imagined when I moved here, but it worked. For me, the solitude meant fewer distractions, more billable hours, and zero obligation to make small talk about weather or sports or whatever else people discussed in break rooms. But then there was my neighbor in 4A. I never caught her name, but everything about her seemed to exist in sharp contrast to my carefully cultivated isolation. She moved through the hallway with purpose, heels clicking against hardwood. Always impeccably dressed, like she'd just stepped out of a business magazine. Dark suits, elegant scarves. Not a hair out of place even during summer humidity that turned me into a sweaty mess just walking to the corner store. You know those people who seem to inhabit a completely different reality than your own? That was her. While I shuffled around in worn sweatpants, she wore tailored wool coats and carried leather briefcases that probably cost more than my monthly rent. When I dragged myself to check my mail at 2 in the afternoon, she'd be striding past with dry cleaning draped over one arm, keys already poised in her hand. I got pretty good at timing my necessary excursions to avoid running into her. It wasn't that she was unfriendly, quite the opposite. The few times we'd crossed paths, she'd offered polite smiles and pleasant small talk about misdelivered packages or upcoming maintenance work. But something about her composure made me acutely aware of my own rumpled existence. Better to just stay in my lane, I figured. Our interactions settled into a comfortable distance. Brief nods, if we happened to check mail at the same time. Maybe a quick evening as we passed in the hall. Once she'd held the elevator for me when I was struggling with grocery bags, but we'd ridden up in silence. My social anxiety cranked to maximum as I tried not to breathe too loudly in the enclosed space. I told myself I preferred it this way. My work didn't require face-to-face interaction. My gaming friends lived scattered across time zones, and my family had mostly accepted that holiday video calls were the best they'd get from me. The solitude was a choice, I insisted to myself. A professional necessity. But on this particular Thursday evening, something disrupted my carefully maintained bubble. I was deep in debugging mode, headphones on, when a muffled thud from the hallway caught my attention. I pulled one ear free just in time to hear a frustrated sigh and what sounded like something heavy being dragged across the floor. I recognized her voice. Usually so composed, now carrying an edge of strain. "Come on, just a little further, ... My hand hovered over my mouse, cursor blinking accusingly on my screen. The responsible thing would be to check if she needed help. That's what a good neighbor would do, right? But the thought of voluntarily stepping into interaction made my pulse quicken. Another scraping sound, followed by a soft curse that seemed jarringly out of character for her usual polish. I pushed back from my desk slightly, chair wheels whispering. Against the floor, the door was only 15 feet away. I could open it, offer assistance, and retreat back to my sanctuary in under a minute if I timed it right. But what if she wanted to chat? What if helping with whatever she was struggling with led to some obligation for future social interaction? Sounds continued, and I sat frozen in my chair, watching the gap under my door for shadows and wrestling with this unexpected disruption to my comfortable isolation. I stood up from my chair, finally making the decision. The sounds from the hallway had grown more frustrated, and before I could second-guess myself, I opened my door. There she was, trying to balance what looked like 3 overstuffed accordion files while swiping her keycard against the electronic lock. The small red light blinked repeatedly, denying her entry each time. Her usual composure was slipping, dark hair falling from its careful arrangement as she shifted the weight of the files. "Can I help?" I managed to ask, my voice sounding oddly loud in the hallway. She turned, surprise flickering across her features. Before relief took its place, "Oh, would you? These files are trying their best to escape, and this stupid keycard." She held out the unwieldy stack. I stepped forward and took the files, their weight catching me off guard. She dug through her bag, producing a physical key instead of trying the card reader again. "Technology's supposed to make life easier, right?" I said, attempting small talk. "Sometimes the old ways work better." "Exactly." The lock clicked, and she pushed her door open. "Would you mind bringing those in? And would you like a glass of wine?" As a thank you, my usual instinct to retreat surfaced immediately, but something made me pause. Maybe it was the genuine warmth in her invitation, or maybe 6 months of self-imposed isolation had finally reached its limit. "Sure," I heard myself say, "that would be nice." Her apartment was nothing like I'd imagined. Where I'd expected minimalist furniture and stark white walls, I found warm colors and countless books. Art prints covered the walls, not corporate-look abstracts, but vibrant landscapes and city scenes. A royal blue reading chair sat by the window, a half-read paperback splayed open on its arm. "You can set those down anywhere," she said, heading to the kitchen. "I hope red is okay. I just opened this bottle last night." I placed the files on a side table, taking in more details, family photos. A collection of what looked like handmade pottery, plants thriving on every windowsill. "Red's perfect," I replied, though I knew almost nothing about wine. She returned with 2 glasses, gesturing for me to sit on the sofa. "I'm Caroline, by the way. I don't think we've ever properly introduced ourselves." "James," I said, accepting the glass, though most people online just know me as my debug messages. "You know, undefined is not a function and all that." She laughed, a real laugh, not the polite chuckle I'd expected, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "A developer. I should have known from the odd hours. I hear your mechanical keyboard through the wall sometimes, late at night." "God, I'm sorry about that," I started, but she waved it off. No, it's actually comforting. Reminds me, I'm not the only one burning midnight oil. I'm usually reviewing case files when I hear it." The conversation flowed easier than I'd expected. We talked about our respective work. She was a corporate lawyer, hence the endless files, and traded stories about the building's quirks. The elderly superintendent who insisted on calling everyone young lady or young man, regardless of age. The mysterious thumping that could be heard in both our apartments every Sunday morning. She told me about growing up in Seattle, where she'd developed her coffee addiction. I shared stories about learning to code by making increasingly ridiculous modifications to video games. Time slipped by unnoticed until I caught sight of the clock on her wall. "Oh wow, it's past midnight," I said, surprised. We'd gone through most of the bottle of wine, and my usual social anxiety had mellowed into something almost comfortable. "Is it really?" Caroline checked her watch. "I didn't realize." I should probably review at least one more file before bed. I stood, knowing it was time to leave, but feeling strangely reluctant. Thanks for the wine, and the company. She walked me to the door, and before my courage could desert me, I added, maybe we could do this again sometime. I promised to bring better debugging jokes. Her smile, in response, was warm and genuine. I'd like that. Maybe next time I'll tell you about the time I accidentally submitted a brief with all the placeholder text still in it. Back in the hallway, I found myself standing there longer than necessary, processing what had just happened. My carefully maintained routine had shifted, and, surprisingly, I didn't mind at all. The next few days felt strange. Every footstep in the hallway made me look up from my monitor, and I found myself listening for the familiar sound of her door. We'd exchange smiles when we did cross paths, warmer than our old polite nods, but still brief. Neither of us suggested another evening together. It was better this way, I told myself. One pleasant conversation over wine didn't mean anything. Had to change? I had my routine, she had hers. But I couldn't help noticing new details, how she hummed quietly while checking her mail. The way she always paused to straighten the welcome mat between our doors. The heatwave hit on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the city was baking under relentless sun that turned every surface into a radiator. My air conditioning struggled against the heat, and I could hear others' units droning at full power through the building's walls. I coded with a fan pointed directly at my face. Watching the weather reports grow increasingly dire, at 3:17 in the afternoon. Everything went dark. My screens blinked off mid-keystroke, and the blessed hum of air conditioning died. The emergency lights in the hallway flickered weakly before giving up entirely. Perfect, I muttered, sitting in my rapidly warming apartment. My laptop battery had maybe an hour left, and I eyed my phone's precious 68% charge. The building's group chat exploded with messages about the outage affecting the whole block. No estimated repair time. The sun beat against my windows like a physical presence. I opened them, hoping for a breeze that didn't come. Instead, the sounds of the city drifted up 12 floors, car horns, distant sirens, the general irritation of a metropolis without power. An hour crawled by. I'd moved to the floor, where it was marginally cooler, when a knock startled me. Opening the door, I found Caroline standing there, in a loose sundress, holding what looked like a bat fan. Hey, she said, looking almost apologetic. I have a proposition that might sound weird, but hear me out. My balcony actually gets decent air movement, being on the corner. I've got this fan, some battery packs, and a cooler of drinks. You're welcome to join if you want to pool resources. I hesitated only briefly. My apartment was already approaching sauna temperatures. Let me grab a few things. She nodded. Bring whatever you want to contribute. I'll leave my door open. I gathered what I could, a 6-pack of craft beer I'd been saving, some chips, and my portable phone charger. After a moment's thought, I added my laptop battery pack too. Her apartment was dim without power, but large windows let in plenty of light. The balcony door stood open, gauzy curtains stirring in what might have been the suggestion of a breeze. Caroline was arranging cushions from her couch on the balcony floor. I figured we might as well be comfortable, she explained, taking the beer I offered. The super says it could be ours. The view from her balcony was better than mine, wrapping around the corner of the building. The city sprawled out below, oddly quiet, without its usual electrical hum. The sun was lower now, painting everything in deep orange as it sank toward the horizon. We set up our impromptu camp, the fan positioned for maximum effect. Drinks in easy reach, phones plugged into my battery pack. The heat was still oppressive, but somehow more bearable shared. Better than sitting alone in the dark, Caroline said, settling onto a cushion and opening a beer. The sunset caught in her hair, turning the dark strands to copper. I took a seat, too, feeling the day's last light warm on my face. Below us, the city waited for power, but up here, 12 floors above it all, we'd carved out our own pocket of comfort in the chaos. At least we've got supplies, I said, reaching for a beer and a view. The sun dipped lower, and I watched. The darkened city spread out before us, neither of us feeling the need to fill the comfortable silence with words. The makeshift camp evolved with a kind of spontaneous charm. Caroline disappeared inside for a moment, returning with a bottle of red wine and proper stemmed glasses that seemed absurdly civilized given our circumstances. They looked almost comical next to my craft beer and half-crushed bag of chips, but somehow the contrast felt right. "I hope you don't mind if I stick to wine," she said, settling back onto her cushion. "Never developed a taste for beer." "The variety is perfect," I said, watching her pour with practiced grace even in the dimming light. Like an accidental picnic, as the sun finally set, the city below transformed. Usually ablaze with countless windows and streetlights, now only scattered. Emergency systems and car headlights punctuated the darkness. The temperature dropped just enough to make breathing easier, though we still positioned ourselves carefully within range of the battery-powered fan. "Look," Carolyn said softly, pointing upward. "You can actually see Cassiopeia tonight. The light pollution usually hides it." I followed her gesture, finding the distinctive W shape of stars. I haven't done any stargazing since camping trips with my dad when I was a kid. "Tell me about them," she asked, tucking her legs underneath, her wineglass balanced carefully, so I did. I told her about learning to pitch tents in the backyard first, about my father's terrible camp cooking, about the time we forgot matches and had to drive 30 miles to the nearest store. She laughed at all the right moments, asked questions. That showed she was really listening. Around us, the building wasn't quite silent. Voices drifted through open windows, neighbors talking, complaining about the heat, making dinner plans by candlelight, but no one else seemed to have claimed their balcony as refuge. We had our own island in the darkness, separate from the mild chaos around us. "Richard would have been losing his mind right now," Caroline said suddenly, then pressed her lips together. "I'm sorry, ex-husband, I shouldn't bring him up." "Hey, no," I said, shifting to face her better. "I'd rather you feel comfortable being real with me than trying to, I don't know, perform some edited version of yourself. The good and the complicated parts are all part of who you are, right?" She looked at me then, and even in the dim light I could see something shift in her expression, surprise, warmth, and something else I couldn't quite name. The moment stretched between us, heavy with unspoken things. I realized we'd gradually moved closer together as the evening wore on, ostensibly to share the fan's limited breeze. Now, I could catch the subtle scent of her shampoo, see the way her throat moved as she took another sip of wine. The heat made everything feel more immediate, more intense. Each small movement seemed to carry extra weight, double quotes, that's single quotes, as ... She started, then paused to find the right words. "That's refreshingly direct. Most people get awkward when I mention him." "Well, I'm awkwardly direct instead of directly awkward," I said, winning another of her genuine laughs. The fan's battery was starting to fade, its movement becoming sluggish. Neither of us moved to replace it. The darkness had become comfortable, making it easier to talk, to be honest, to sit close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. "If the power's still out tomorrow night," Caroline said, turning her empty wineglass between her fingers, "would you want to do this again? Same arrangement?" "Yes," I answered, maybe too quickly, but she smiled. The second night of the power outage became the third, each evening falling into an easy pattern. We'd meet as the sun set, pooling whatever supplies we'd managed to gather during the day. By the fourth night, when Caroline suggested we try the rooftop instead of her balcony, it felt like the most natural progression in the world. "It might be a little cooler up there," she'd said, fanning herself with a magazine, "and we could spread out more." She was right about both counts. The roof offered a whisper more breeze than the balconies, and the extra space felt luxurious after days of careful positioning around her small outdoor furniture. Most importantly, it was completely private. The rest of the building's residents had bunkered down in their apartments, making do with battery-operated fans and cold showers. We'd created our own little oasis up there, collection of cushions, She'd brought up, my old camping blanket spread beneath us, our usual mix of wine and beer keeping cool in a makeshift ice bucket. The city sparkled below us, still operating on partial power, while our building remained dark. My daughter called today, Caroline said, breaking a comfortable silence. She's worried about me surviving without air conditioning. She laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. She's 24, you know, living in Seattle now. The way she said it casual but deliberate made my heart skip. We'd been dancing around this topic since that first evening in her apartment. I cleared my throat, feeling heat that had nothing to do with the weather. I actually Googled our age difference last week. Her laugh this time was genuine, relieved. Did you really? Yeah. Felt kind of creepy doing it, but I needed to know, and I still kept coming back to talk to you. She was quiet for a moment, tracing the rim of her wineglass. Since the divorce, she said finally, it's like I became invisible in certain ways. Or no, not invisible exactly, more like I got reduced to these roles, mother, boss, ex. She took a sip of wine. Nobody sees just ... me anymore. Caroline, the person who still likes to dance in her kitchen and reads science fiction and wants things for herself. I see you, I said softly, then felt my face warm at how earnest it sounded, but she turned to me, eyes bright in the darkness. You do, don't you? That's what makes this so ... double quotes complicated. I offered. I was going to say interesting. She smiled. Or maybe dangerous. I shifted position, getting more comfortable on our makeshift seating. I know what you mean about roles and not fitting. I'm stuck in this weird, in-between space, too old for my college friends with their bar crawls and roommate drama. Too young for most of my professional peers with their mortgages and preschool planning. And where do our conversations fit? She asked. They're the first time in years I've felt like someone's actually hearing me. Not just nodding along, waiting for their turn to talk. The night air shifted then, as if responding to our honesty. A slight breeze finally stirred, carrying away some of the day's oppressive heat. Caroline shivered slightly, the first time I'd seen her react to cold rather than heat all week, without thinking. I moved closer, closing some of the careful distance we'd maintained. She didn't pull away. If anything, she seemed to lean slightly toward me, though it was hard to tell in the darkness. The space between us felt different now. The air seemed charged with possibility, with questions we hadn't asked yet. Every small movement, the brush of her arm against mine as she reached for her wine. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear felt magnified, significant. It's strange, she said quietly, how a power outage can change everything. Is that what changed things? I asked, my voice equally soft. She turned toward me then, close enough that I could see every detail of her expression, thoughtful, uncertain, but not afraid. The question hung between us, unspoken but impossible to ignore. What happens next? The moment stretched between us like honey, sweet and slow. We were both leaning in, drawn by something that felt inevitable, yet fragile. I could feel the warmth of her breath, count her eyelashes in the dim light. Just as the distance began to close, her hand came up to rest against my chest, not pushing away, just pausing everything. We should talk about this, she whispered. Her voice was gentle but firm. Every nerve in my body argued against more talking, but I knew she was right. Yeah, I managed. We should. She didn't move her hand from my chest, but she did lean back slightly, creating space for clearer thoughts. The city twinkled below us, a constellation of emergency lights and partial power, while our building remained in darkness. Maybe that made it easier, having this conversation in shadows. I need to know something, Caroline said, her eyes finding mine, and I need you to be completely honest with me. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Is this ... am I some kind of experiment for you? Working through something? Looking for a story to tell later? The question stung, but I understood why she had to ask it. No, I said firmly. God, no. This isn't about proving anything, or collecting experiences. I ran a hand through my hair, frustrated at how inadequate words felt. You're not a category to me, Caroline, you're just ... you. She nodded slowly, processing this. Okay, good, because I need you to understand what you'd be choosing here. The complications, the judgment. People will make assumptions about both of you. I know. I shifted to face her more directly. But can I ask you something too? When she nodded, I continued, is this about validation for you? After the divorce, I mean, because if you're looking for someone to remind you that you're still attractive, no, she cut in, then softer, no. I've had those offers, plenty of them, actually. This feels ... different. Her hand finally dropped from my chest, and I missed the contact immediately. But you're right to ask. We both need to be sure about what this is. We talked for what must have been an hour, though time felt strange up there on the roof. We discussed everything we'd been dancing around for days. The age gap significant, but not as shocking as either of us had first thought. The reality of how others might react. Her daughter, my parents, our neighbors. The potential professional implications for both of us. What struck me most was how intimate even this conversation felt. The way we chose our words so carefully, wanting to be understood completely. How we maintained eye contact even through the difficult parts. The deliberate distance we kept while talking, both knowing that touch would make clarity impossible. You understand, she said at one point, that this won't be simple. That there will be moments when the age difference matters in ways we can't predict. I understand, I replied. But I think, maybe simple isn't what either of us needs right now. That earned me a smile, one of her real ones, the kind that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. No, perhaps not. Finally, after we'd examined every angle, voiced every concern, she fell quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was soft but steady. I want this, but only if you're completely sure. Only if you truly understand what you're choosing. The city lights reflected in her eyes as she waited for my response. I took a breath, gathering my courage. Can I kiss you? I asked. Properly this time, now that everything's been said. Time slowed to honey when our lips finally met. No hesitation this time, no pulling back, just the gentle certainty of a decision made with clear eyes. Her hand found my jaw, fingertips light against my skin, and I wondered how such a careful touch could feel so electric. The kiss deepened naturally, like breathing, like falling. When we finally parted, the city lights below seemed brighter somehow, though I knew that was impossible. Caroline's eyes met mine, and I noticed her breathing had changed quicker, less controlled. Mine probably had too. Everything felt different, now, charged with possibility and the weight of what we'd chosen. Neither of us spoke for a long moment, letting the reality settle between us. We should go back inside, she said softly, though she hadn't moved away. It's late. I nodded, suddenly hyper-aware of every point where we were still touching. Yeah, okay. The walk back to her apartment felt both longer and shorter than usual. We didn't hold hands in the stairwell to expose but our shoulders. Brushed with each step, the heat that had driven us to the roof seemed less oppressive now. Or maybe I just had other things on my mind. Inside her apartment, lit only by battery-powered lanterns, we faced the first small negotiations of our new reality. Where to sit? How close? Should I offer to leave? Should she offer me another drink? Everything felt magnified. Significant in a way it hadn't been before. She solved the first question by gesturing to the couch. Sit with me. I did, careful to leave enough space between us, not too close, not too far. She smiled at the deliberate distance, then reached for my hand. The simple contact sent warmth spreading through my chest. I think, she said, running her thumb over my knuckles, we should take things slowly. Okay, I agreed immediately, though my racing pulse argued otherwise. Slow is good. She laughed softly. You say that very convincingly. I mean it, I insisted, turning to face her better. I don't want to rush this. It's too important. Her expression softened at that, and she shifted closer, eliminating some of the careful space I'd left. Good answer. We talked more after that, but everything felt different now. Words came between shared glances and gentle touches her fingers, tracing patterns on my palm, my thumb brushing her wrist. At some point, she leaned into my side, her head coming to rest on my shoulder. The trust in that simple gesture made my heart catch. I fought against the urge to prove something, to push for more. Instead, I focused on matching her rhythm in this careful dance we'd begun. The weight of her head on my shoulder, the scent of her shampoo, the way her breath had slowed to match mine, these small intimacies felt more significant than any grand gesture could have been. Time stretched like taffy, marked only by the gradual warming of the room as the night deepened. Eventually, Caroline lifted her head from my shoulder, though she didn't move away entirely. "I should probably say good night," she murmured, but made no move to stand. I studied her face in the lantern light, noting how her lips curved up slightly at the corners. "Probably," I asked, keeping my voice light. "Does probably mean definitely, or is there room for interpretation?" "Probably," she repeated, her smile growing warmer. "Means I'm not quite ready for this evening to end." I shifted on the couch, adjusting so she could settle more comfortably against me. Her head found its way back to my shoulder, and my arm naturally curved around her. The lantern light cast soft shadows across her face as she began to speak. "I should tell you about David," she said quietly. "My ex-husband." Her fingers interlaced with mine as she continued. "It wasn't dramatic, no affairs, no screaming matches. We just stopped seeing each other, even when we were in the same room." I listened as she described the slow fade of her marriage, how silence replaced conversation until they were essentially roommates sharing a home. Her voice carried no bitterness, just a gentle sadness as she explained how they'd finally admitted it was over. "Sarah, my daughter, she took it harder than we expected," Caroline continued, her feet tucking under my leg for warmth. "She was 22, already living on her own, but I think she had this image of us as her safe harbor. When that changed, she sighed. She's better now, but sometimes I catch her watching me like she's waiting for my next mistake." My thumb traced circles on her shoulder as she spoke. "What does she think would be a mistake?" "This, probably." Caroline laughed softly. "Dating a younger man, living differently than before. She'd call it a midlife crisis." "Is that what you're worried about?" I asked carefully. "That this is just rebellion." She lifted her head to look at me directly. "No, but I worry others will see it that way. That they'll reduce everything I feel to some predictable pattern." "I understand that," I said, thinking about my own fears. "I keep wondering if people will think I'm just attracted to your confidence, your experience, if they'll assume I have some kind of complex." Her hand squeezed mine. "And do you have a complex?" "No," I answered honestly. "What I feel when I'm with you, it's not about your age or experience. It's about how you listen when I talk about coding like it matters. How you laugh at my terrible jokes. How you make me feel seen." The sky outside had begun its slow transition from black to deep blue, but neither of us moved to check the time. Caroline shifted, drawing her knees up onto the couch, maintaining contact like she needed the anchor as much as I did. "I haven't felt this present in years," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every touch feels significant, important." As if to demonstrate, she ran her fingers along my forearm, raising goosebumps in their wake. We talked through the night, sharing stories and fears in equal measure. I told her about my family's expectations, about straddling the line between young professional and actual adult. She described rediscovering herself after the divorce, learning to want things again. The first hints of dawn began to color the sky when exhaustion finally caught up with us. Caroline stifled a yawn, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd blinked. "You should stay," she said, sitting up slightly. "The hallway's still dark, and you're too tired to fumble with keys." A pause then. "I have a guest room." We both knew the offer wasn't really about practical concerns. It was about prolonging this bubble of intimacy we'd created, about not wanting to break the spell just yet. "Okay," I agreed, matching her casual tone. though my heart had picked up speed. Thank you. She led me down the hallway, our fingers still loosely linked. At the guest room door, she paused. The moment stretched between us, charged with possibility. But we'd chosen to honor the trust we'd built through the night's confessions. Sleep well, she said softly, squeezing my hand once before letting go. I watched her linger in the doorway, memorizing how she looked in the pre-dawn light, hair slightly mussed from leaning against me, eyes tired but bright. This careful restraint felt like its own kind of intimacy, a promise of more nights like this one. The soft whir of machinery pulled me from sleep, air conditioners cycling back to life, refrigerators humming their steady rhythms, modern convenience returning like the tide. I blinked in the unfamiliar guest room, memories of last night filtering back through the morning haze. A coffee scent drew me toward the balcony where we'd spent so many evening hours. Caroline stood there already, dressed in a cream blouse and tailored pants, her professional armor partially restored, but when she turned to me, her smile was the same warm one I'd grown to know by candlelight. "There's fresh coffee," she said, gesturing to a second mug on the small table. "I hope I didn't wake you with the machine." "The power coming back did that," I replied, accepting the coffee and joining her at the railing. The morning light painted everything in different shades than our evening conversations, clearer, more real somehow. She'd pulled her hair back neatly, but a few strands had escaped to dance in the morning breeze. I resisted the urge to tuck them behind her ear, uncertain of morning after protocols in this delicate new space we'd created. "We should probably talk about what happens next," Caroline said after a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Now that real life is powering back up." I nodded, appreciating her directness. "People will have opinions, they always do." She turned to face me fully. "Sarah will likely assume I'm having some sort of crisis. My colleagues will whisper, 'Your parents will think you're taking advantage of me,'" I finished, meeting her gaze steadily. "Or that I'm rebelling against their life plan for me. Neither is true." "Tell me why," she said softly. Not a challenge, but a genuine question. I set my coffee down, wanting to give this answer my full attention. "Because when I'm with you, I feel both challenged and accepted. You laugh at my terrible debugging jokes, but also push me to think bigger about my work. You treat me as an equal, while still being yourself. This isn't about age or rebellion, about how naturally we fit." Her eyes softened at my words. "I haven't felt this way in years," she admitted. "Maybe ever. But sometimes I worry I'm being selfish, pulling you into complications you don't need." "Maybe being selfish about happiness isn't wrong," I countered. "We're both adults making a conscious choice. The complications are part of that choice." Caroline considered this, sunlight catching the silver threads in her hair. "So what are you suggesting? How do we handle this in the real world?" "We move forward with intention," I said, surprising myself with my clarity. "Not hiding, but not announcing either. Taking things day by day, being discreet but not secretive." "Discreet but not secretive," she repeated, testing the words. Like that distinction. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city below return to its normal rhythms. Then Caroline gestured to our improvised camp, from the past few nights, the battery-powered fan, scattered cushions, empty bottles. "We should probably clean this up," she said, a hint of reluctance in her voice. Together, we gathered the evidence of our heatwave nights, falling into an easy rhythm. She collected glasses while I folded blankets. I held the garbage bag while she swept stray crumbs. Simple domestic movements that felt surprisingly natural. "You know," I said as we worked, "whatever challenges come, I'm certain about this about us." Caroline paused in her tidying, looking at me with that mix of warmth and something deeper I'd come to recognize. "I'm certain too," she replied, nervous, but certain. The balcony slowly transformed back to its normal state, but something had shifted permanently. We'd created something here during the power outage, something that would continue even with the lights back on. The morning sun warmed the balcony as we worked together, transforming our makeshift sanctuary back into its ordinary state. I gathered the blankets we'd huddled under during those powerless nights, folding each one with careful attention. Caroline collected the empty bottles, glass clinking softly as she lined them up for recycling. "It's strange," I said, smoothing the last blanket. "How quickly this space became something else entirely." She hummed in agreement, pausing in her task. "Amazing what a power outage can reveal, isn't it?" There was something different about her movements, now a slight hesitation, as if she was working up to something. I noticed her hand drift to her pocket once, twice, before she finally reached in and pulled out what looked like a building key. "I had this made yesterday," she said, turning it over in her hands. "During the outage. For emergencies." Her smile suggested a new definition of that word entirely. I thought, well, it might be practical, given everything. My heart did a strange little skip as I understood what she was offering. This wasn't just a kit, was trust, intention, acknowledgement that whatever was growing between us deserved space to flourish. "Are you sure?" I asked, though I was already reaching for it. "I wouldn't have had it made if I wasn't." She pressed the card into my palm, her fingers lingering against mine. "Besides, after the last few nights, it seems a bit silly to pretend we won't want to see each other." The plastic was warm from her pocket, and I ran my thumb over its smooth surface. "Thank you," I said, meaning far more than just the key. "I have a work dinner tonight," she continued, her tone carefully casual. "But afterward, if you wanted to come by." The invitation hung in the air between us, its significance barely masked by her light delivery. "What time do you think you'll be back?" I asked, matching her tone while my pulse quickened at the prospect. "Around 9, probably." She tucked that escaped strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture I now recognized as meaning she was both nervous and pleased. "Use your new key." "I'd like that," I said simply, not trying to hide my smile. We stood there for a moment, the morning sun painting everything in honest light. The keycard felt like a promise between us, a physical token of all our careful conversations and deliberate choices. Caroline stepped closer then, one hand coming up to rest lightly on my chest. Despite the broad daylight, despite the windows of other apartments potentially witnessing, she kissed me. It was quick but confident, nothing hidden or shameful in it. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. With certainty, "I should get ready for work," she said, though she didn't move away immediately. "Me too," I agreed, though my workday would just involve walking across the hall to my laptop. We finished tidying in comfortable silence, and I gathered my things to leave. The normalcy of these actions, collecting my phone charger, folding the last blanket, checking I hadn't left anything behind, felt surreal against the backdrop of how fundamentally everything had changed. Back in my apartment, I went through the motions of my morning routine: shower, fresh clothes, coffee made in my own kitchen that felt strangely empty after days of sharing space. But everything felt different now, charged with new possibility. I sat at my desk, the keycard placed carefully beside my keyboard, where I could see it. Such a small thing, really just a piece of plastic with a magnetic strip. But it represented something massive: her choice to trust me, to make space for me in her life, to acknowledge that whatever was growing between us deserved a chance to develop naturally. 9 o'clock suddenly seemed very far away. I picked up the keycard again, already planning when I would use it that evening. Already imagining the quiet thrill of letting myself in, of being expected, welcomed, wanted. My fingers traced the edges of this new possession, this token of trust that meant so much more than emergency access. Through my window, I could hear the city returning to its normal rhythms, air conditioners humming, traffic building, but nothing felt normal anymore, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I spent the day in a haze of anticipation and doubt. My laptop screen blurred as lines of code refused to make sense, my mind wandering to the keycard sitting beside my keyboard. I picked up my phone at least a dozen times, composing messages to Caroline, only to delete them. What could I possibly say that wouldn't sound either too casual or too intense? The hours crawled by. I made coffee I didn't drink, paced my apartment, checked the time so often it seemed to move backward. When evening finally arrived, I stood in front of my mirror longer than I'd care to admit, trying to look both intentional and natural. At 9:15, I stood outside her door, keycard in hand. My heart thundered as I slid it into the reader. Watching the light turn green, the soft click of the lock felt momentous. I opened the door to find the apartment lit with candles, their warm glow creating intimate shadows despite the restored power. Caroline stood by the kitchen counter, changed from her work clothes into something softer, loose sweater that slipped off one shoulder, revealing skin that caught the candlelight. Her hair was down, freed from its usual professional constraints. "Hi," she said simply, and that one word carried so much meaning. We had wine, red breathing in glasses on the counter, but neither of us reached for them. Words felt unnecessary now, replaced by the gravity pulling us together across the room. Every step closer was deliberate, every breath measured. When I reached her, my hand found her waist while hers came to rest on my chest. How familiar points of contact transformed by new intention. Each touch was a question, my fingers tracing her collarbone, her hand sliding up my neck. Each response was an answer, her slight shiver, my caught breath. Time stretched and compressed. The city continued outside her windows, but we existed in our own space, mapped by candlelight and careful exploration. When she took my hand and led me toward her bedroom, it was with the same quiet certainty that had brought us this far. What followed was unlike anything I'd known before. Her confidence was infectious, making me feel simultaneously young with wonder and aged by the weight of the moment. We moved together with a tenderness that felt both natural and extraordinary. Every gesture was considered, every response cherished. Afterward, we lay wrapped in each other's warmth, not speaking but not silent either. The city lights painted shifting patterns on her ceiling through the gauzy curtains. Her head rested on my chest, her breath evening out against my skin. My fingers traced lazy patterns on her shoulder, memorizing the texture and warmth. In that moment, existing in the space we'd created together, everything felt possible. The age gap, others' opinions, all the practical concerns that had seemed so important, they didn't disappear. But they settled into proper perspective against the reality of us. Here, choosing each other with full awareness and intention, the candlelight flickered across her walls, casting gentle shadows that danced like the thoughts I couldn't quite form into words. Some things I was learning didn't need to be said to be perfectly understood. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the rich aroma of coffee. For a moment, I lay there, letting reality settle in. This wasn't a dream. Following the scent, I found Caroline in her kitchen, wearing my button-down shirt from yesterday, her bare legs catching the morning light as she moved between counter and stove. She looked up and smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I never make breakfast," she admitted, gesturing to the eggs and toast she was preparing. But today felt different. The domesticity of the scene hit me then, how natural it felt to pad barefoot across her kitchen floor, to reach around her for a coffee mug, to kiss her shoulder as I passed. All these intimate morning rituals, brand new, yet somehow familiar. We sat at her small breakfast table, legs tangled underneath, and talked about the practical things we'd need to figure out. "The neighbors will notice eventually," she said, spreading jam on her toast. "Especially Mrs. Henderson from 403. She notices everything." "We could be discreet," I offered. "At least until we're ready." She nodded, then hesitated. "My daughter's coming to visit next month. She stays here when she's in town." I reached for her hand across the table. "We'll figure it out. Maybe by then we'll be ready to tell her." "And your conference in September?" she asked. "Still want me as your +1? "Absolutely," I said without hesitation. "Though we might raise some eyebrows." "Let them raise," she replied, squeezing my hand. We moved to the balcony with fresh coffee, the same space where everything had started during the blackout. Below us, the city was fully awake, traffic flowing, people rushing to work, normality restored. But we'd found something in the darkness that felt worth protecting in the light. Caroline leaned against the railing, my shirt slipping off one shoulder. We're not hiding, she said thoughtfully. But we don't have to announce ourselves either. No, I agreed, moving to stand beside her. This space, right here, it's just ours for now. The morning sun warmed our faces as we stood there, coffee cups in hand, watching the city below. Not hiding in shadows anymore, but not quite ready to step fully into the light content in this in-between space we'd made our own. If tonight's ending felt right, hit subscribe and share this with one person who needs a gentle story. I'll be here tomorrow with another